Well, this is JC again. I got my Willie Nelson headband on. I thought I'd change things around just a little bit. And I sort of turned the lights down. I just still got my black T-shirt on. It's my all-purpose Durango Kid, Lash LaRue, Roy Orbison, Johnny Cash T-shirt, and anybody else who really likes black. Anyhow, I got to go to the doctor's office tomorrow, and I got to thinking, God, what if I get that damn doctor's office? And he said, Boy, I'll be surprised if you make it home alive. And I'll be sitting all the way home getting ready to crash or do whatever I'm going to do. I'll be wondering, now, what the hell's going to happen with Todd and Leslie? So I thought, nah, you know what? I can't hack this. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So I went ahead and wrote chapter 11, my book entitled Todd. I'm going to read it to you now. And I really hope you enjoy it. This will kind of, after this chapter, the format of the I don't know what you call it, format, plot, or whatever of the story will change somewhat, and then it really is not going to last very much longer. Up until now, it's been like the soap opera type, tune in today, tune in tomorrow for another episode, that sort of thing. Which is this one. This chapter 11 is the same way, but after chapter 11, the format and the line will change a little bit. So we'll see what happens. That is, provided I make it home all right. No, I really will. I'm just kidding with you about that. So, anyhow, without further ado, go ahead. I'm going to read to you now chapter 11 of my book that I entitled Todd. Now Todd had to decide whether to go ahead. Oh, I forgot to tell you too. I decided not to wear my glasses this time. I made the letters bigger so I could read them. So I don't look, you don't have to see my reflection in my glasses all the time. Anyhow, I'll start over now. Now Todd had to decide whether to go ahead and explain his life situation to the Foleys or wait for another day. He asked Mr. Foley if he wished to listen now or at some later date. Mr. Foley looked a question at his wife and she shrugged. Didn't matter to her. Mr. Foley wondered aloud if this would be a good time, with Mrs. Daniels' situation as it is and all. He wouldn't want to impose on her at this time of grief unnecessarily. Betsy said it didn't matter to her. Aunt Lola suggested she and Betsy could go to her house for the rest of the day and wait for Todd to call. Or if you like, we can just make a day out of it together. Get away from the crying and all that for a while. I can keep you busy, don't worry. Bessie thought about it for a moment and said, Can you all wait a few minutes? They agreed they could. They wouldn't mind at all to wait. Betsy went into the kitchen. She and Lola had put away much of the food left by everyone, and the table was almost bare. She unplugged the coffee pot and emptied the old coffee grounds into the trash can. Then she rinsed the percolator. She filled it with clear water, added coffee grounds, put the lid on, and plugged it into a wall socket. The percolator started perking almost immediately. Betsy sat at the kitchen table for a minute or two, listening to the coffee perk and looking at the tabletop. She thought about her life with Bobby and the home they had made together, the life they had lived together, and the love and happiness they had shared. Then she sadly shook her head and murmured, It's over now, isn't it, Bobby? Betsy walked back into the living room and, smiling, said, There's a fresh pot of coffee perking. Then to her Lola, she said, Okay, sis, let's go to your house. She thanked the Foleys for coming, gave Leslie's hand a gentle squeeze, and kissed Todd on the cheek. At the door, she turned back and, with a smile, said to the Foleys, You understand, of course. We will all be family. Something much more powerful than all of us has decided that already. And without waiting for a response, she and Aunt Lola left. Leslie spoke first. She told her parents how she had gone to the park to study, that she found a concrete park bench that didn't look like it would be popular, so she picked it for herself to be alone so she could study. She explained how one day she had heard someone coming and hid behind a shrub so she wouldn't be seen. It was Todd. She waited for him to leave, hoping the cold, hard concrete bench wouldn't appeal to him and he wouldn't come back. But he kept coming back, and she kept hiding, at least for a while. Then one day she decided to take her bench back. She finished telling the rest of her story to her parents and how she had loved this man as soon as he spoke to her. how he had felt the same about her. She said, Mom, Dad, I can't explain it, but this is the way it is and always will be. I hope you can understand. They both assured her parents this would not change ever. Oh, Leslie, her mother said, how can this be? It's all so sudden. How can you be sure? What if you have children and then find this was a mistake? Leslie, what if you have a child before you even married to Todd? Todd said that won't happen. Mr. Foley spoke now. Young man, how can you be sure of that? Hormones are very powerful things at your ages. No matter how careful you are, an accident could happen. Daddy, said Les, you don't think we intend to have sex before we're married, do you? Her father looked at her with obvious surprise at what she had just said. Then Todd said, Mr. Foley, I love your daughter, and I would never put her in that position. We'll love each other more in a few years than we do now, and it won't depend on having sex. Now Mr. Foley remembered that Todd had said 2.5 years. He asked Todd, what is the 2.5 years about? Why would you have to wait? To finish school or what? Now the question had been asked, and Todd knew it was time to tell the Foleys all. He said, folks, let's have a cup of coffee and talk. Without waiting for them to answer, Leslie arose and went into the kitchen. Todd followed her, and they got cups, saucers, and a serving tray. He put the coffee on the tray and then added the sweetener and creamer containers and a spoon. Then they took it back into the living room and sat it on the coffee table. They waited to speak until all had fixed their coffee. You could feel the worry and curiosity coming from the Foleys, so Todd began. Folks, Todd said, I would like to ask you to just listen to my story without commenting or questioning until I'm finished. Will that be all right? They shrugged and reluctantly agreed. Todd started his explanation with the days before his birth, with his mother's extreme size during her pregnancy and the sonogram image of the unborn baby. He explained the large size of his head before and after birth. He told of his ability to know a question when it was thought. Todd looked directly at Mr. Foley, the child psychologist now, and said, No, it isn't impossible. Mr. Foley was surprised, but said nothing. He told about his homeschooling, and he told about the ball game he and his dad attended. He explained he could read and fully understand a book in only brief minutes. Up to now, he hadn't mentioned anything about his age. Now Todd stopped talking, and he sipped his coffee. Mr. Foley asked, You mean you have never attended any school after the first semester of the 3rd grade? That's right, said Todd. I homeschooled myself. It was pretty easy with a computer and all, and I've read extensively about almost everything imaginable. Les, with a big grin, spoke up. Now, Daddy, Todd's the smartest man in the world. He knows everything, everything. Mrs. Foley said, Now, Leslie, that can't be, not at his age. Not at his age. Leslie smiled a knowing smile at Todd. Oh, I got to do that over. Mrs. Foley said, Now, Leslie, that can't be, not at his age. Not at his age. Leslie smiled a knowing smile at Todd. Daddy, Todd never forgets anything. Ask him anything, about anything, really. Ask him something you think he just couldn't know. And please call him Todd. It was obvious the Foleys thought their daughter was being led on with such an outlandish claim as this. All right, Leslie, said Mr. Foley. Todd, what do you know about child psychology? Only what I've read, said Todd. I've never been subjected to it myself. Mr. Foley asked a very technical question now about the theory of child psychology, the expectations of certain things under specific situations involving a child, any child. Todd thought about this for a moment. It took about 10 seconds for his mind to retrieve the information. Then he quoted the theory word for word and told Dr. Foley the name of the textbook, the page it was on, and the paragraph, and the item number, and he named the author. Mr. Foley was stunned. He shook his head slightly, as if to assure himself he was awake. Dumbstruck, he looked at this young man, not knowing what to say about the impossible thing that he had just listened to, just witnessed. Mr. and Mrs. Foley, Todd said, I have never committed a crime. I never will. I've never said or done anything to offend or harm anybody, and I never will. And I had never been in love until I met your daughter. I had no idea how wonderful it would be to love someone completely. Now I do, and your daughter, Leslie, is my future. Leslie smiled at Todd and agreed with him about everything. Now Mrs. Foley spoke. But why do you have to wait over 2 years? Surely you're old enough to marry now. Todd looked at Les now. I guess I'd better tell him now, he said. No, said Leslie, I'll tell him. Todd nodded in assent, and Leslie said, Mom, Dad, Todd developed very early. He's only 12 and a half years old now. He can only marry with his mother's permission at age 15, 2.5 years from now. The Foleys stiffened for a second. Then both sank back against the back of the sofa, and they were very quiet. Leslie had never seen either of his parents at a loss for words before. Now they both were. Leslie said to both of her parents, Mom, Dad, I love and respect both of you very much, but I love Todd too, and I am going to marry him as soon as he's old enough. Neither Todd nor Les could suppress a chuckle at her last words, as soon as he's old enough. Neither of the Foleys laughed. Mrs. Foley took her daughter's hand and said, Oh, Leslie, Leslie, what are we going to do with our little girl? Mr. Foley took his wife's hand and squeezed it gently. Then he looked intently into the eyes of this strange young man, Todd, and with a knowing shrug of his shoulders, he said, Well, young man, Todd, welcome to our family. Now, this is the end of chapter 11 of my book that I entitle Todd. I hope you'll come back for chapter 12. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm sure if I enjoy writing it, you're going to enjoy reading it too. So anyhow, this is JC saying I'll see you down the road if the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise.